My mother announced it like it was nothing. Like she was reading out a grocery list. She stood at the head of the table at my parents' 30th anniversary dinner, champagne glass in hand, and said the whole family was flying to Whistler the following weekend for a celebration trip. Everyone cheered. My brother Kent raised his glass. My sister-in-law Bev clapped her hands together like a child. My father Gareth, 62 years old, and the man I had spent my entire adult life trying to make proud, just smiled into his wine. I was sitting at the far end of the table. I had driven 2.5 hours from Ottawa to get there. I had brought flowers. I had helped my mother, Lorraine, set up the decorations that afternoon, while everyone else arrived late and empty-handed. I asked what time the flights were leaving. The table went quiet in that specific way that tells you everyone already knows something you don't. My mother set her glass down. She looked at me the way you look at someone who has made a minor social error. She said the trip was for the moving past it. She said the trip was for the immediate family. Then she looked around the table and smiled again, like that was the end of it. I said, slowly, that I was her. She said yes, but I didn't have children, and the trip was really designed around the grandchildren. Kent's 3 kids. Bev's parents were even joining. There was only so much room at the chalet. My name is Lydia. I am 37 years old. I am a licensed occupational therapist. I own my home. I have never once in my adult life asked my parents for money. And I sat at that table and felt something I had no word for at the time, something that was not quite humiliation and not quite grief, but was made of both of them. And I smiled and I said, "Oh, of course. That makes sense. That was my first mistake. It would be the last one I made for them." I should explain something about my family before I go further, because otherwise none of what comes next will make sense. Kent is 41. He works in commercial real estate in Toronto, or at least he used to. He and Bev, who is 38, have 3 kids under the age of 10. A house that is significantly too large for what they can actually afford, and a lifestyle that has always depended, quietly and without acknowledgement, on our parents absorbing the overflow. 2 years ago, Kent's business went through what he called a restructuring. What it actually was, as I would later learn, was a near collapse. He lost 3 major clients in 6 months and spent about 8 months bleeding money at a rate that should have resulted in some serious lifestyle changes. It did not result in any lifestyle changes, because my parents covered it. I found this out not from Kent, not from my parents, but from a comment my aunt made at Christmas that nobody followed up on, because everyone in my family has a deep generational allergy to discussing anything real. My parents are not wealthy by any dramatic standard, but they are comfortable. My father retired from the civil service. My mother worked in hospital administration for 25 years. They own their house outright. They have savings. They have a pension. What they also have, as I understand it now, is a very clear and very long-standing belief that Kent's needs are urgent and mine are optional. It was not always obvious to me. You don't see the water you're swimming in. I just thought that was how families worked, that some people needed more and got more, and that was fine. I was independent. I didn't need much. I told myself that was a good thing about me. I started to understand it differently about 4 years ago, when I had a brief health scare, nothing ultimately serious, but scary enough that I was off work for 3 weeks and ended up drawing down some of my savings. I mentioned this to my mother on the phone. She said she hoped I felt better soon, and then told me about a problem. Kent was a whole conversation. That was the whole conversation. That was when I started paying attention. The weekend after the anniversary dinner, I was home in Ottawa alone, and I thought very hard about what had happened at that table. Not about being excluded from the trip exactly. More about the mechanics of it, about how it was announced without any private conversation beforehand. About how my mother looked at me when I asked the obvious question. About how my stepfather said nothing. I called my mother on Sunday afternoon. She picked up on the second ring, cheerful, already in the middle of telling me about the chalet rental. It was in Whistler, 4 bedrooms. The kids were going to love the snow. Kent had found it online, and it was such a good deal. I asked if we could talk about what happened at the dinner. She sighed. Not an impatient sigh, a tired one. The sigh of someone who has had this conversation before and finds it exhausting. She said there was nothing to talk about. These things happen. Trips have logistics. Not everyone can always come. I said I was her daughter, and I had not been told about the trip until it was announced in front of the entire extended family. She said I was being sensitive. She said Kent's children needed their grandparents. She said I would understand when I had kids of my own. That last sentence, I've heard it my whole adult life, used as both a rebuke and a dismissal, as if the absence of children meant the absence of a full interior life, as if I hadn't simply not yet found the right person and made that particular set of choices yet. My mother has said it at least a dozen times. It always lands the same way, like a door being shut. I hung up the phone and sat in my kitchen for a long time. Then I opened my laptop and started going through things. This next part is difficult to explain without sounding cold, and I want to be clear that it didn't feel cold. It felt like finally turning on a light in a room I had been navigating in the dark for years. I am an occupational therapist. My job, fundamentally, is assessment. It is understanding systems and identifying what is and isn't working and why. I am good at it. I applied it to my family. What I found over the following 2 weeks was not a single dramatic revelation. It was a pattern. Quiet, consistent, years long. 4 years ago, when Kent's business was struggling, my parents had given him a personal loan, not a small one. I found reference to this in an email my mother accidentally copied me on 2 years ago, which I had read at the time and then mentally filed away as not my business. I went back and read it again. The amount mentioned was $60,000. Kent had not paid it back. There was no indication, in anything I could find, that there was a formal plan for him to do so. My parents had also, twice in the last 3 years, paid Kent and Bev's property tax when they ran short. This I knew from things that had slipped out in conversation, and which I had also, each time, filed under not my business. What I had not known until I had a conversation with my aunt, my mother's sister Loretta, who is 70 and has no patience for pretending, was that my parents had also co-signed on Kent's business line of credit 2 years ago. This was not a loan. This was a guarantee. If Kent defaulted, the bank could come after my parents' assets. I called Loretta on a Tuesday evening, and I said, without preamble, "Do you know what's actually going on with Kent and the money?" She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "How much do you know?" I told her. She told me the rest. The cosign was the thing that changed everything for me. Not because of the money itself, not even because they hadn't told me, but because of what it meant structurally. My parents' retirement security was partially contingent on my brother's business not collapsing. And Kent's business, as far as anyone could tell, was still fragile. He had rebuilt it somewhat, but he was not in a stable position. He was one bad quarter away from real trouble. I am the daughter who doesn't need anything, so I don't get told anything. I sat with that for a while. Then I made an appointment with a financial advisor I knew professionally, a woman named Deb, who I had met through a hospital partnership and who I trusted completely. I did not tell her whose family I was asking about. I just described the situation in general terms and asked what the exposure looked like. She was not encouraging. She said that co-signing on a business line of credit was one of the highest risk things a retiree could do. She said that if the business defaulted and the assets were insufficient to cover the debt, the bank could pursue my parents' savings and potentially put a lien on their home. She said this was not uncommon, and that she had seen it happen to families who thought they were just helping. I thanked her and drove home and sat in my car in my driveway for 20 minutes before going inside. I want to be honest about what I felt then, because I think it matters. I was not angry at Kent. I know that might sound strange given everything. But Kent is someone who has always been told yes, and people who are always told yes do not develop the muscle for no. That is not an excuse. It is just true, and I think I understood it. I was not even angry at my parents in the way I expected to be. The anger felt quieter than that, more like grief. I had spent 37 years being the daughter who was fine, and in being consistently fine, I had made myself invisible to the people I most wanted to be seen by. That is not something you can fix with a confrontation. That is something you have to sit with. But what I could do something about was the practical situation. Because regardless of the emotional history, my parents were in a genuinely precarious position that they did not seem to fully understand, and I was the only person in the family with both the knowledge and the motivation to do something about it. So I did. I asked my father if I could come for dinner, not a family. Dinner, just the three of us. He said, of course, he always wanted to see me, they'd make chicken. He sounded surprised in a way that broke my heart a little, that I was asking for ordinary time with them, that it was notable. I drove to Brampton on a Thursday evening in February. My mother made roast chicken and potatoes, and she poured me a glass of wine, and for a while it was just dinner, just us, and it felt like something I hadn't had in a long time. After we finished eating, and my mother was putting the kettle on, I told them I wanted to talk about something. My father looked up. I said I wasn't there to cause problems or revisit old arguments. I said I was there because I loved them and because I had come across some information that I thought they should understand, and I thought they deserved to have someone in the family looking out for them the way they had always looked out for everyone else. My mother sat down. I laid it out as clearly and as gently as I could. The cosign, the exposure, what a bank could do with a personal guarantee on a business line of credit if the business defaulted. I didn't editorialize. I didn't bring up the anniversary dinner or the Whistler trip or anything that was about me. I just told them what Deb had told me, in plain language, and I let them sit with it. My mother's face went through several things in about 30 seconds. My father was very still. After a long pause, he asked how I knew about the cosign. I said that wasn't what mattered. What mattered was whether they understood what they had agreed to. He said they had trusted Kent. They had wanted to help. I said I knew. I said I would have done the same thing for someone I wanted to help. But I asked if they had talked to anyone before they signed. A lawyer, an advisor, anyone. They hadn't. We talked for 3 hours that night. My mother cried once, quietly, and then pulled herself together. My father asked questions in the careful, methodical way he has always approached things that frighten him. By the end of the evening, they had agreed to contact a lawyer and a financial advisor the following week to understand their actual exposure and to have a direct conversation with Kent about the loan repayment. I did not stay for that conversation. It was not mine to be part of. What I found out from my father about 6 weeks later was that they had indeed met with a lawyer, and that the situation was manageable but required action. Kent had agreed, after a conversation that I gather was not easy, to work with a proper repayment schedule for the personal loan. The business line of credit was restructured so that my parents was reduced. It was not a perfect outcome. It was not a fine, but it was a real one. My father called me after that meeting and he said, "Lydia, I don't think we've been fair to you." That was all he said. But he said it plainly, without qualification, and it was the first time in my memory that my family had said something true out loud without anyone looking away from it. I said I appreciated that. He said he meant it. I believed him. The Whistler trip happened. Without me, I knew it would. I did not expect a last-minute invitation, and I did not want one. What I wanted was what I had always wanted, which was to be treated like a person who mattered to my family, and the trip was not the measure of that. The conversation at that table was, Kent called me 2 weeks after the Whistler trip. He had clearly been told something, though I don't know exactly how much. He was awkward on the phone, which is unusual for Kent, who is rarely awkward about anything. He asked how I was doing. I said fine. He said he'd heard I had been helpful with Mom and Dad. I said I was glad I could be. There was a pause, and then he said genuinely, thank you. I said he was welcome. And I meant it. I was not there to burn anything down. I was there because I wanted a family that was actually honest with each other. And the only way to get there was to start being honest, even when it was uncomfortable, even when it cost something. Here is what I know now that I did not know before. Being the easy child, the low-maintenance one, the one who is fine, is not a virtue if it makes you invisible. I had spent my whole life being careful not to be a burden, and in doing so I had made myself into furniture. Present but unnoticed. Useful when needed, unremarkable the rest of the time. The night my mother announced the Whistler trip, I smiled and said, of course, that makes sense. I was protecting her from the awkwardness of what she had done. I was doing what I had always done, absorbing the discomfort so no one else had to. I'm not doing that anymore. It is not a dramatic change. I did not walk out of anyone's life. I did not issue ultimatums or demands or speeches. I just started telling the truth about what I saw, what I needed. And what I found, which surprised me, was that the people who loved me were capable of hearing it. When it came from a place that wasn't accusation, when it came from someone who was still standing in the room with them. My parents and I had dinner again last month, just the three of us, same as February. My mother made the same chicken, my father poured the wine, and at the end of the evening, when I was putting on my coat, my mother hugged me for a long time and said she was glad I came. She has always said that, but this time I believed she meant something different by it. Not just that she was glad I showed up, but that she was glad I was there, that she knew the difference. That is the only thing I ever wanted. I drove home to Ottawa in the dark, the highway empty, and the sky that particular shade of deep winter blue that you only get in February in Ontario, and I felt, for the first time in a long time, like I was not disappearing.